Uncanny Academy of X-Men. I am Jared, and first off, yes, we shortened the title. Instead of the Uncanny Academy of X-Men lore, it's just the Uncanny Academy of X-Men. Just figured it flowed better that way. Also, did I mention that we are the premier mutant themed podcast in the Comics League YouTube channel. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. We have plenty of other fantastic shows on the channel that are fantastic, that cater to a wide range of fandoms, from Star Wars, Zack Snyder, Marvel, DC, Halo. So we have we have a diverse content portfolio that I think you guys are going to enjoy. All right. So anyway, what are we talking about this week? So as you know, the way I do this show is I like to basically intersperse like general topic episodes, like a general discussion. So they don't have Lad, I'll just do discussing myself and talk to you guys. So normally I do a story and then a general topic, and then a story, then a general topic. So today's our general topic. Since last week, we talked about the fantastic story that is House of X, Powers of 10. So today, you may ask, so Jared, what are we talking about today? Now, I covered like the best X-Men stories. I covered my favorite X-Men stories. But now we're going to cover the absolute worst X-Men stories. We're going to cover as of 2020, that I have the list, and we'll find another list too, the worst X-Men stories of all time. So let's get into it, shall we? First off, one more thing. I'm going to say this on the other podcast, but it's official, ladies and gentlemen. I am now holding the Snyder Cut in the palm of my hand. It's beautiful. It's one thing to be able to watch it on HBO Max. It's another thing to hold it in my hands. I'm going to put it back in its display. All right. We are talking about the 10 worst X-Men stories of the past decade. So this is from comicbookreview.com. All right. Now, we're going to start with, so we're going to read the article. With the monster success of Jonathan Hickman's Dawn of X, it's hard to remember the tough road the X-Men were on prior to the event because they didn't know the movie rights. For years, the Merry Mutants were subject to second-tier placement of Marvel hierarchy. Whether that was due to Fox holding the film rights is entirely different article. Yeah, it is. Sorry about that. I don't know why I'm coughing so much. The stories reflecting the status. Some stories were forgettable, overshadowed by what came before them and what has transpired since. In this piece, we'll be examining X stories from 2010 until 2020, sorting ones that haven't aged well, weren't engaging, or just plain bad. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get talking about it. All right. Jubilee becomes a vampire. Oh, yeah, this was super bad. This was really bad. In one of the most bizarre stories of this decade, the X-Men try to hold off a vampire attack on San Francisco that resulted in longtime mall rat Jubilee being infected with vampire blood. Yes, this was an actual storyline. They basically made X-Men Twilight. That's pretty much what it became. Pixie and Jubilee are in a cafe when a man explodes, bits of him infecting the patrons in the nearby vicinity. He has an explosive personality. This kicks off a brawl with vampires that sees Dracula, Blade, and the aforementioned vampire, Jubilee, both aiding and fighting the X-Men. The X-Club work on a cure for vampirism, so that was cool at least. Yeah, but I'm like, see, Marvel keeps trying to do stuff with Jubilee because she was like one of the characters from the animated series, but I'm like, there's so many other characters you could be highlighting. All right. The Dream Inverted. I have no idea what this is about, so let's read. Axis. Oh boy. Axis saw heroes and villains with their motivations flipped due to an attempt to stop an Xavier-powered Red Skull. And the X-Men were hit with the waves. Instead of peaceful coexistence with humanity, their now warped ideal became to lord over humanity with Evan Sabanor becoming Apocalypse. This event basically used the X-Men as punching bags, having them serve the purpose of of villains to move the narrative. So let me get this straight. Apocalypse's son's name is Evan. Really? It was a bizarre gimmick that gave us Crazy Havoc and a Wolverine light version of Sabretooth in future X books, which were not good. Cyclops' army of badasses. Just after Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKell finished their tenure with the X-Men, they gave Cyclops a team of mutants to deal with the potential threats to mutant kind. That team spun off into a version of the Uncanny X-Men that saw Cyclops using an abandoned Weapon X facility to try and train newly discovered young mutants to join his guerrilla army. That is actually kind of cool. This book and its characterization of Scott Summers, led to a huge backlash against the former X-Men poster boy. One that he's still battling the stigma of to this day. The whole Cyclops the egg-hole. Also, I hate his costume. I'm going to say it. I absolutely abhor this Cyclops costume. It's too dumb. I don't like the X over the face. I don't like the full bodysuit. This design, it just looks terrible. I'm like, no, I hate it. I do like Magneto with the white suit, though. That looks really cool. Yet another version of the Horseman. Oh boy, this concept. One of Apocalypse's most well-known bits is selecting his 4 horsemen, and this trope has been milked over the course of decades. In the Extraordinary X-Men, readers had to endure another recasting of the Horsemen, this one as random as any before them. Colossus, Deadpool, Moon Knight, and Venom. Okay, that's an interesting combination. We also see an unhinged Nightcrawler, which is never fun. Yeah. However, this story centers on Colossus, who wants to train a new team and then slipped into the Archangel Wolverine Gambit role of we have to break Apocalypse's hold of our friend. I'm like, okay, so my problem with this is that's a really like bogus combination of Horsemen of the Apocalypse, because it's like, okay, so you got Colossus, Deadpool, Moon Knight, and Venom. There's no like correlation. I don't like it. Substitute Wolverine. OG Wolverine had been dead for a while. So what are the X book? So what are X books without a grumpy Logan around doing grumpy Logan things? After Secret Wars, Old Man Logan was sucked into the 616 universe and almost seamlessly made his way into a bevy of different mutant squads and his own solo book. So it was like OG Wolverine never left. The most frustrating part of Old Man Substitute, that was good, was the overshadowing of the person who rightly inherited the mantle of Wolverine, Laura X-23 Kinney. Debatable. I hate whenever they replace characters. I think it's the dumbest thing in the world. I'm like, really? You're not creative enough to basically be able to create a better, another version of this character. You have to replace the one we have now. Really? You're that creatively bankrupt. Avengers antagonize the X-Men. I am on for this. AVX shows 2 teams in conflict regarding what to do with the incoming Phoenix Force. On the one hand, readers had the mutants, which have dealt with this threat for decades. And on the other, you had Cap and company tell them, no, it was asinine. Probably the worst part of this event was the Phoenix Force was shattered, thanks Iron Man, and taken into Cyclops, Emma Frost, Namor, Colossus, and Magic. The Avengers kept hangering the Phoenix Five and the X-Men, despite all the good they did around the globe. That's true. Yeah, the Avengers characterization, the storyline, it very clearly made the X-Men look out to be the good guys, kind of. And what I mean by that, and remember, I covered this story like, I think it was 2 weeks ago, 2 story episodes ago. So basically, they're 100% right, because it's the X-Men saying, listen, let us handle this Phoenix Force. We've dealt with it before. We're probably the subject matter experts of the groups here in dealing with Phoenix. We probably know how best to deal with her. And Captain America's like, nope, we're going to deal with it now. I'm like, I agree with this criticism of that storyline. And also, it's like, okay, so they have Phoenix powers, but the Avengers keep fighting them. This is like in Civil War, where the war kept going on and on and on and on and on, because it was essentially what this turns into is a big ego fest. I'm like, oh, come on, guys. You could do better than this. Oh, my gosh. I hate this with a passion, Bendis. All new, old, young X-Men. Beast was just plain old disgusted with his former best pal Cyclops. The results of AVX saw Phoenix-powered Cyclops pushed to madness and murdering Professor Xavier. Cyclops then started a radical team to recruit mutants to his side. What was Beast to do? He pulled the original 5 X-Men out of the past to scold his buddy. Beast, one of the smartest characters in the Marvel Universe, decided he wanted to disrupt the time stream to make his former best friend feel bad. It didn't work, of course, which led to X-Men Blue for some reason. We're getting to that. But yeah, this was the whole all new, all different initiative was the biggest like screw up I think we've seen in comics so far. And I'm going to address this for a second, not just because we got really dumb versions of characters, really like, I'm like, why does this exist? But also, it's the whole idea about how the MCU is getting started and you replace all of your popular characters. What? I don't want to get too far into this, but yeah, the all new X-Men thing is like one of the things where as soon as I heard this idea, as soon as because the summer, this past summer is when I really got into reading X-Men. As soon as I heard about this, I was like, oh, this is the dumbest, but it sounds like something that would be an all new, all different X-Men. It's that stupid. To the point where they immediately reversed it. And then they have the scene where Jean Grey is like, oh, but Iceman, by the way, you're gay now. Just like that, just jarring like that, no build up, no indication that ever was a part of his character. To the point where, again, I'm like, come on, guys. All right, X-Men Blue for some reason. The original 5 X-Men sticking around the current timeline, which led them to stick around the current timeline. Yes, this created a huge paradox that could have ripped reality itself asunder. Yeah. Hello. Yes, this created, okay, but it was brushed under the rug of, it's a new timeline now, so that these time displaced teams could galvanate across the country. Oh, man, this is just the dumbest thing in the world. Oh, man. It's just this is just the dumbest thing in the world. Look at what happened with DC and Flashpoint when Barry Allen messed one thing up in the timeline. Look what happened to that. Marvel did basically that. I'm like, the hell, guys. This is the dumbest thing. I'm like, Bendis, really? I expected more from you in your Marvel tenure. Come on, brother. Marvel tries to make the Inhumans happen. Oh, yeah, I heard about this. So what happens when you take the enmity event of Axis X-Men and combine it with the nonsense rationale behind AVX? You get Inhumans versus X-Men. Oh, boy. All right. During this period, Marvel was desperately trying to make the Inhumans into a flagship franchise. Basically, what they were trying to do is they're trying to make, since they couldn't do the movie right, they were trying to make the Inhumans popular so they could replace the X-Men permanently with the Inhumans. Obviously, that didn't work out so well. The story featured a revelation that the Terrigen Mist, the trigger to Inhuman transformation, was lethal to mutants. So when Black Bolt detonates the Terrigen bomb and massive clouds of the stuff circles the globe and kills hundreds of mutants indiscriminately, the X-Men are the bad guys for trying to stop it. Duh. Yeah, I know. I'm like, you're committing mass genocide. Like, mass genocide. All right. Number 1, no play. Oh, this is fantastic. I remember reading about this. The worst X-Men story of the last decade, however, doesn't pertain to any particular written narrative. The launch of X-Men Gold in 2017. 2017 was like the worst year for Marvel of all time. However, it doesn't pertain to any particularly written narrative. The launch of X-Men Gold in 2017 had both Marvel and readers alike excited for a new direction of their favorite mutants. Unfortunately, the issue contained 2 secret hate messages. Eridan Sayef used scenes with Colossus and noted Jewish Marvel character Kitty Pryde to display images connected with anti-Semitic, anti-Christian messages. It was a blunder on a national scale and a horrible thing to do on a book that consistently promotes tolerance and equality. Yep. That describes it perfectly. All right, so next. So those are some of the worst things that have happened to the X-Men. The worst things that have been the worst X-Men stories of all time. And I have to agree with, like, The vast majority of these. Let's try this one now also. We're going to do 20 controversial stories fans want to forget. This is also from comicbookreview.com. So over the decades, the X-Men have seen a lot of highs and lows. Every decade has seen them with some fantastic storylines that comic fans love to talk about. I freaking love the X-Men. They're my favorite Marvel book. At the same time, there are story arcs that are downright horrible to endure. The 90s are infamous for how totally convoluted the X-Men books became, with far too many long-range mysteries, nutty retcons, and an obsession for gimmick covers. Also, the X-Men are the worst when it comes to Marvel's obsession with event crossovers. Yes, these comics have some world-shaking events to them that often had fans' heads twirling. So much was so often changed, either in canon storylines or special one-shots or alternate universes. That is not even counting the movies. Some storylines have been rather controversial. Sometimes it's for their content, themes, situations that are just uncomfortable to read today. Other times it's because of a terrible character development or retcon that fans prefer to forget. Some occasions it's because it's just bad on so many levels. It's not just being terrible as a storyline, but also for the characters and the X-Men franchise as a whole. Some stories have been ignored by fans because of those issues, while others are still brought up when fans talk about their regrets. Here are X-Men 20 controversial storylines. Okay, here we go. Vulcan. For some time, the X-Men writers had hinted that Scott and Alex Summers had a third long-lost brother. In the Deadly Genesis event, it was revealed by Professor X created a special X-Men team led by that brother, Gabriel. Those X-Men perished, so Xavier made Scott forget all about it. Xavier is like, they like to say he's the Martin Luther King of Marvel, except he is MLK if MLK was super manipulative and had mind powers. Those X-Men perished, so yeah. Vulcan returned more powerful than ever and driven mad by the ordeal. Yeah, I could imagine. After being thrashed, after trashing the X-Men, Vulcan heads into space. Sorry, it's the DC fan in me coming out. He eventually took over the Shi'ar Empire as a mad emperor and instigated a galactic war. The character clashed with Havoc and some other X-Men, and even appeared to have taken down his own father. When last seen, Vulcan was shoved into a cosmic vault and has yet to return. This was as of 2018. This is before Hickman. IVX. Yep. X-Men fans have long enjoyed how the MCU X-Men fans haven't enjoyed how the MCU has cut mutants out entirely. That includes elevating Inhumans to the place of the X-Men, of people gaining superpowers. The comics have done much of the same, with the Inhumans setting off a massive Terrigen bomb that created new mutants around the world. It also created clouds that were deadly to mutants. In the IVX series, a massive cloud is set to cover the entire planet and basically wipe out mutants. Rather than work with the Inhumans to find a solution, Cyclops instead leads the X-Men to openly attack them. This leads to several battles that don't have to happen at all, as the X-Men prefer reason over sheer violence. It culminates in a crazy turn as Cyclops appears to have been taken down by Black Bolt. It turns out that that Scott died of the plague earlier, and it was the White Queen, Emma Frost, faking this whole thing to inspire mutants to fight against the Inhumans. To write off a long-standing character in such a pathetic fashion just makes this even loathsome by fans. I was going to buy the storyline, but I'm like, no, I'm good. Decimation. By 2005, the X-Men had gone from merely a small team to a huge race. Indeed, a subplot had been introduced indicating that in a few generations, mutants would overtake humans in birth rates. Some Marvel editors felt this ruined the X-Men's theme of being the persecuted minority, and something had to be done. Yet fans would agree they went a bit too far. At the end of the House of M event, Scarlet Witch cast her no more mutant spells. Overnight, the mutant population is depowered to barely over 200 mutants worldwide. While cutting down on the mutant populace wasn't a bad idea, suddenly making them an endangered species was something else. It didn't help that editors couldn't agree on who did or didn't have powers anymore. This was also the decision to have X-Men protected by Sentinels. It was eventually reversed, return the X-Men to a school helping young mutants learn about their powers. The Decimation is barely spoken of, as it's a clear example of a fix that just did more damage. That's true. Although House of M was a fantastic storyline, the end of it was terrible. Zero Tolerance. The X-Men have had a long issues facing the government. 1997 Zero Tolerance storyline just took that to the next level. The concept wasn't too bad, as the mysterious Bastion convinced the US government to lead a full-on attack on mutants. The X-Men found themselves captured as the mutant was stripped totally bare, as the mansion was stripped totally bare. That Bastion insisted he was doing the right thing, protecting the world, made the story more interesting. However, in execution, it was flawed, with too many storylines that fell and ran rather short. Instead of a huge epic, the entire thing lasted only a handful of issues. It also introduced Marrow and Maggot, who many fans feel are two of the worst X-Men ever. The ending was a complete, and if you want to know who Maggot is, please refer to our previous discussion episode, one of our previous ones, talking about the worst mutant powers. All right, the ending was a complete letdown as the government suddenly shuts Bastion down and he quietly surrenders himself. Marvel hyped this event as a major deal for the team, but it turned out to have zero effect. Angel as a healer. X-Men fans would generally agree that Chuck Austen is the worst writer in the history of the franchise. His books had the heroes acting totally out of character and often insane storylines. He'd already angered fans by having Angel romance the teenager Husk. Oh boy. Austen then followed that with the idea that suddenly Warren Worthington was a real angel. His wings were drawn to a ridiculous length, and he suddenly possessed abilities he hadn't had before. His blood could become a super healing agent. Oh boy, I'm not going to read any more of this. This is dumb. Inferno. This was a major event back in 1988, yet it hasn't aged very well. In the massive Inferno crossover, a mad Madeline Pryor totally snaps when she discovers she's a clone of Jean Grey. This led her to join an alliance with the demons Xian and I'm not going to try to pronounce that, to literally bring hell on earth. That'd be actually really cool. New York City is soon taken by demons that bring inanimate objects to life in brutal attacks. Crossover issues showed Spider-Man, Daredevil, the Avengers, and other heroes having a tough time handling this nightmare. It leads to the X-Men and X-Factor uniting with a few of the heroes to turn to darkness themselves. In the end, the day is saved, although Madeline pays the price. The story does clear up the whole issue of her origins and introduces major X-Men foe, Mr. Sinister. But it just comes off way too dark as Demon. Yeah, and the X-Men don't fit well. North Star is an elf. Who the hell is North Star? A longtime member of Alpha Flight, Jean-Paul Barbier, recently joined the X-Men. The Canadian super speedster can be arrogant, but can also be a good aid to the team. Thankfully, X-Men fans are usually ignorant of rather embarrassing attempts to explain North Star's origin. In a nutty storyline, North Star's twin sister Aurora goes missing. Searching for her, North Star runs into Loki, who reveals that the twins' mother was an elf from Asgard, explaining both their powers and pointy ears. North Star goes to Asgard to find Aurora to learn more of his heritage. Oh boy. It was jarring for fans to find the mutant was somehow a true elf, and the reaction was poor. Several issues later, North Star is seen wandering aimlessly around Asgard. It turns out that the whole elf story was nothing more than a joke played by Loki. The real elves literally laughed at the idea of North Star being one of them. He would turn to Earth, and the entire thing has been ignored as a bad prank on everyone. Yes. The Aussie years. Every long-running comic needs to shake up its formula now and then. However, sometimes these shakeups can work poorly. Such as the case was in 1987 when the X-Men appeared to sacrifice themselves to save the world. Resurrected by mysterious power, the team decided to let the world, including family and friends, continue to think they were dead. They then relocated to some bunkers in the Australian outback and ran secret missions. It threw away the fight for a dream concept for a strike force mentality that robbed from the book's theme. The art was good, but the storylines weren't as impressive. Too often, the X-Men were involved in bad stories and ideas of even allies not knowing that they were alive cut them off too much from the Marvel universe. They finally did reveal themselves to the world and returned to the school to rebuild their image. Australia's a great country, but the X-Men adventures there weren't a highlight. Magic's hard life. Few X-Men have gone through the ringer quite as much as Illyana Rasputin. The younger sister of Cyclops, Colossus, Illyana came to visit the X-Men when she was 8. She found herself whisked into a portal by the demon lord Belasco. While the X-Men rescued her, there was a side effect. What was just seconds in our world was a decade in the other realm, and Illyana was instantly a teenager. It was obvious she had been subject to horrific experiences in this other reality, many of which were disturbing to watch. It did give Illyana magic powers and a soul sword that she used as an X-Men. However, the book continues to note Illyana's hardships growing up in the dimension and doesn't shy away from how horrible the ordeal was. Fans may not like it, but it did lead to her growth as a character. So I'm like, okay, that's not bad. Cyclops and the White Queen. Okay, I'm gonna strongly disagree on this. It was a big deal for a while, but a lot of fans are happy to put the spirit behind them. Not exactly. As soon as the White Queen joined the X-Men, she started putting the moves on Scott Summers. At the time, Cyclops was with Jean and thus resisted Emma. However, when Jean sacrificed herself to stop Magneto, Cyclops and Emma made on top of her grave. I can admit that was kind of bad taste. That was the start of a rather troubling romance between them. At times, there were indications that Emma really did love Scott and wanted to be a better person for him. Other times, they came off as manipulative and they made Scott and Wolverine, and that made Scott and Wolverine get into more fights than usual. It got worse when they became possessed by the Phoenix Force and Cyclops turned into a bad guy. It culminated in the ugly events of IVX, and fans prefer to remember Scott and Jean in happier times. Not necessarily, I like the Emma Frost and Cyclops romance, but I agree it kind of got really weird with the AVX. Okay, Zorn and Magneto. Oh, yes. At the time, this was an awesome twist. Few realized the ugly can of worms it was going to open. Zorn had appeared as a monk-type mutant with amazing powers who aided the X-Men. When the team came under attack, Zorn revealed he was actually the presumed dead Magneto, working from the inside to take the team down. Magneto then went on a rampage that was wildly out of character before Wolverine took him down. It was crazy that Marvel almost immediately revealed this wasn't Magneto at all, but an imposter. Yeah, they went back on that real quick. The real Magneto was horrified that anyone could think it was him. This led to an even more confusing turn when the X-Men found the real Zorn in a monastery. The Zorn they'd known was his evil brother posing as Magneto as some warped plan of attack. But then that Zorn came back, so the new Zorn fought. I'm really confused by this. I'm going to move on. Wolverine going feral. A major change to Wolverine was in the Fatal Attractions arc. In a surprise moment, Magneto uses powers to rip the adamantium out of Wolverine's skeleton. This left Wolverine weaker for a time with only bone claws. In 1996, an attempt to put the metal back with Wolverine backfired. In the aftermath, Wolverine began to regress in an even more feral state. Almost overnight, he turned into a near animal figure with no nose, a huge jaw, and even jutting teeth. It was frankly a ridiculous look for him, and it was hard to take Wolverine seriously when he appeared like that. As it happened, and when the new artist took over, he just went back to drawing Logan as he'd always appeared. It was explained that he was using an image educer, but eventually it was all dropped. Wolvie got his metal back, and fans are more than ready to ignore this ridiculous look. Yeah, this looks kind of stupid. Mutant X. The concept was good, but the execution was rather flawed. In the final issue of the first X Factor series, Havoc appears to have been lost in an explosion. In reality, Alex Summers was transported into an alternate Earth to take the place of his own counterpart. This world had some bad differences. Storm was a vampire. Iceman's ice powers were out of control. And the US and Canada were in a Cold War. Oh boy, that's a winning combination. Reed Richards was evil and more. That is terrifying with Reed Richards being evil. It wasn't a bad book at first, but new writers began to shake things up too much and made it a mess. It ended with Alex returning to his regular reality and has never mentioned this entire trip. It was a daring direction, but it just didn't work out well in the end. I agree, this kind of seems kind of convoluted. The whole externals thing. In the 90s, Marvel writers were fond of setting up long-range mysteries, but often no real ending in mind. I hate when that happens. A major example was the externals. The concept was that a race of mutants existed who had been alive for centuries. The idea was that they were secretly fighting it out for power, and if they were secretly fighting it out for power and soon do battle to control the world. It was basically a total ripoff of the popular Highlander movie, and the characters weren't that appealing. Cannonball being killed and coming back to become an external himself. However, later writers basically dropped the whole concept as a manipulation of the mutant witch Selene. Most of the externals ended up not being that immortal after all, as they were all written out. It was a messy storyline that was never connected with fans. All right. The Cable and Strife mess. Oh boy, I've heard about this. When Cable debuted in 1989, fans were excited for him. With his cool look and soldier demeanor, Cable transformed the New Mutants into X-Force to fight for mutants. X-Force is basically the intelligence / special operations group of mutants. They clashed with the Mutant Liberation Front, a criminal group led by the masked Strife. Things took a turn when Strife unmasked to show he was a dead ringer for Cable. This led to an incredibly baffling storyline that would dominate for a long time and just get crazier as it went. To make a ridiculously complex story short, Cable was Cyclops' son, who had been sent into the far future to be cured of a technovirus. Strife was a clone of Cable who had turned into a monster. However, for a while, Strife thought he was the original, which obviously caused a lot of problems. They still tangle now and then, but the ludicrous backstory is a reason fans find it harder to get behind Cable. Joseph. Here's another case of a storyline that looked interesting at first, but got out of hand. In the Fatal Attraction storyline, of where we're returning to this, Professor X mind-wiped Magneto. After his headquarters was destroyed, readers saw what happened to be what appeared to be an amnesiac Magneto. Now somehow 20 years younger, that makes no sense, walking around the country. Calling himself Joseph, he was found by the X-Men, who were suspicious but eventually accepted him. Joseph was troubled by his past as Magneto, but was doing his best to make up for it and aid the team. That was an interesting dynamic, but then came the wild twist. It turned out the real Magneto was still out there, as confused as everyone as to whoever this young man was. In a complex storyline, it was revealed that this was a clone of Magneto created by a rival. Joseph fell in battle and is barely even mentioned these days. Fans prefer the real Magneto over the cheap copy. That's true. Professor X, wait, what? What? The early X-Men stories so this one is called Professor X Loves Jean Grey. Okay. The early X-Men stories by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby bear little resemblance to the team we know today. They didn't push the world that hates and fears them motif as much as it was more straight superhero action. The duo did throw in some touches of soap opera antics with one rather disturbing. When Jean joins the team, it seemed obvious that the triangle would be about Angel and Cyclops, who were both battling for her affections. However, it was shown that Charles Xavier considered himself in love with Jean. Given how Jean was a good 30 years younger and Xavier was her teacher, this was a bit more disturbing. That's an understatement. It was even more worse to read today, given how Xavier sees his X-Men as his children. Oh boy. When she found out about it, Xavier should have meant nothing, and eventually he did get over it. That is disturbing as hell. Almost as disturbing as Sins Past. She-Hulk and Juggernaut. One of Chuck Austin's arcs during his X-Men run involved trying to redeem Kane Marco. Kane Marco is like the half-brother of Charles Xavier, who became Colossus. A longtime enemy of the X-Men, Juggernaut was trying to turn over a new leaf and aided the team a few times. Obviously, his long criminal past was an issue, so the X-Men got Jennifer Walters to defend Juggernaut. One thing led to another, and the two ended up in bed together. Oh no. Fans of She-Hulk will naturally not happy at the idea of Jen just hopping in bed with a known criminal so easily. Later, Dan Slott turned this into a running gag of Jen denying ever being with Juggernaut. The payoff came when it turned out to be She-Hulk from another universe who'd slept with him. Fans much preferred that rather than imagining this as a serious romance. Yep, that looks terrible. Nightcrawler's origins. Yep, it's Chuck Austin again, and this one's a doozy. For a long time, it was implied that Mystique was actually Nightcrawler's mother. This story finally confirmed it, only to reveal his father wasn't who we thought he was. The idea that Mystique had a relationship with a guy who turned out to be Azazel, an actual demon from another dimension. It was used as the excuse for Kurt's features and his teleporting powers. But the story was a total mess with talk of the long conflict between angels and demons and some rather disturbing takes on the romance between Azazel and Mystique. The character barely shows up nowadays, and writers much prefer to skim over Kurt's fatherly ties. Fans are grateful for that, as Kurt is a much better character than this horrible story deserves. And finally, Holy War. Nothing sums up the chaos of Chuck Austin's X-Men run like this. It starts with several mutants found crucified on the lawn of the mansion. The investigation reveals that Nightcrawler's supposed priesthood had all been faked by the Friends of Humanity. The wild plot involves somehow making Kurt named Pope and then revealing that he was a mutant to the world. That they felt the sight of a demon in this spot would lead to the Catholic Church to be destroyed, and the world would turn on mutants. Think that's crazy? Just wait. The next part of the plot involved faking the rapture by having poison communion wafers cause people to vanish. The problem being Catholics don't even believe in the rapture. Then the leader of the Friends was a woman who wanted Catholics destroyed because of a personal trauma in her past. The entire story was an insane mess that was insulting to comic book fans of any faith. That's true. That's insulting. I'm a Catholic, and that's insulting. So these are some of the most worst and controversial X-Men storylines of all time. So, yeah. All right. Here are my thoughts. I thought Spider-Man had really effed up storylines. I did not anticipate this. The whole, oh yeah, Professor X is in love with Jean Grey. Oh no. That was like, no. Oh, please, God, no. It's freaking ridiculous. All this, and yeah, Chuck Austin's X-Men run sounds terrible. The only one I disagree with is number 11 with the Cyclops and the White Queen. I like that relationship. I thought that went off really well. A lot of these are like, Magneto turns out to be this guy, but it's not that guy, it's Magneto. It's like something confusing like that. Yeah, and I love how on all the worst X-Men storylines or like the most controversial, it's always IVX shows up. So I'm like, all right, I got it. Yeah, it's because it's like, yeah, they could have just talked through their issues and said, hey, before you Terrigen Mist everyone, can we figure out a way to make it so it's not lethal to mutants? Cool? Okay, cool. We're not going to fight. But instead, they're like, no, we're going to go to war. Let's do this. And I'm like, okay, guys, this is ridiculous. So anyway, guys, on that note, that's going to call it for this week. We're going to do, so I hope you'll join us tomorrow, because tomorrow, Lad and I are going to do a Knights of Mandalore episode. And it's going to be doing a retrospective of the Bad Batch series, meaning we're going to look back at season 1 of Bad Batch, what we liked, what we didn't like, a bunch of other stuff concerning the show. Hope you guys will join us for that. And we'll see you also this Friday for Under Two Capes. Anyway, class is out of session. Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.